parts of the presentations as he wants to. He really wanted to be online with everyone tonight. So I want to let our guests know that what you're going to see is the students, this has been a class on educational leadership, it's been a long day already. I've been reading dissertations all day. It's a class in reform and educational leadership. And the students, as part of their looking at reform, they did a case study on something specific where they could go deep, something that would be a current issue, something that people might be facing currently in the systems, whether it be pre-K-12 system or the higher ed system. We did have one group that actually did something quite different. They were more community-based because they were responding to a call for a paper, and I'm going to let them talk about that when they get started. But the call was a paper that was going to be written about what works in urban education, which is certainly a different way of looking at urban education than we normally look at. So there's a slightly different in that matter. I'm very excited tonight. This is the first time that I've taught the class online. I've been teaching this class. I've taught it several times in Bakersfield and Fresno several times. It's been a few years now. I was lucky enough to get to take over this class from a mentor of mine who was at it for a long time, and I'm really glad to be working with Chuck. Chuck's my co-teacher, co-partner, who's been giving feedback to me all along, and it's really good to have you with us here tonight for your feedback. Thank you. So I'm going to turn to Adria because her group is going to go first. So I'm just checking in to see if you are ready. And what they're going to do is they're going to take over the screen, and they're going to present their research to us. And then we're going to be going on to the next group, which is Allison's group. And then Tasha's group, and then Kathy's group. And I know we're going to do Pete and Steve last. But there's one more group in there that I missed, so we'll put them between Kathy and Pete.
That was us. That's the group. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Take it away, everybody.
Okay. Hi, everybody. We're excited to be here. We are the group that is. No.
Can you hear us all right?
We can hear you.
We're rocking.
We are the group that responded to the call for papers in looking at the successes of Oxnard schools, an urban school district. It was very interesting for us to take this and go into a different way of looking at things, considering we are typically looking at the negative and pitfalls and failings of urban schools. So this is a paradigm shift for most researchers and a mindset of change to looking at things that are positive, things that are looking at urban schools in a successful way. So we were very interested in this, and we were very excited to figure that out. So when we looked at our urban schools, we looked up what urban schools are typically defined as. Typical urban schools are defined by the National Center for Education Statistics as being at least 64% minority and 13.6% poverty. Oxnard fits into that with being an 85% minority and a 16.5% living in poverty. Within Oxnard, the growth of Oxnard has grown from the 1930s when it was first settled, and now the Oxnard area is the 13th largest city in California. So it actually exceeds what the urban definitions of urban schools are. 50,000 students are in Oxnard schools right now, and the entire district is a Title I district. Every school is in some type of program improvement, or what was previously called program improvement. So Oxnard actually fit very well into the definition of what urban schools were. We were really excited to be able to look at a local community and see how Oxnard schools succeeded in the urban area out here in Ventura County.
So as we looked at our research on urban schools, we had a few key articles that we referred to for trends and patterns of how urban schools were succeeding. One article in particular highlighted that students developing skills with self-respect, command of the standard English language, goal setting, self-motivation, time management, consequence awareness, and respect for others were the key learning characteristics that developed and produced the most success among students. And within those, there were 6 skills that were tied to those characteristics, which were building confidence, making connections, setting goals, how to manage stress, increasing well-being, and understanding motivation. We kind of started to see a theme amongst the literature that pointed out that the students themselves were getting support from somebody who was mentoring them along the way. And they felt that sense of belonging and the sense of connectedness to school through that mentorship. And as they continued to, as we continue to review the literature, that was the strand or the theme that really stood out was mentor type relationships, which led us to look at how do we find some success indicators of students that have graduated out of a school system, out of an urban school system. And we initially started looking at the 40 developmental assets framework that really guided us into one of their new revised publications on relationships. And the relationship framework by the Search Institute outlines the qualities that are listed here: express care, challenge growth, provide support, share power, and expand possibilities. And when we gave our survey, those were the common themes that we got back in our answers as well. So I know that we'll get to that in a couple of minutes. And we also looked at social emotional learning. In a lot of the cases that we were seeing, they were being mentored by somebody in a relationship that was helping teach them how to achieve the goals that they wanted to achieve. And so looking at the literature and seeing these themes and strands, these were really the key ideas that popped out, which led us to our methods.
So our methodology was a mixed methods approach. We had 28 participants ages 18 to 46 years who had all gone through Oxnard schools. And the quantitative part being that we asked demographic questions and also rated questions. And then qualitatively, we asked short answers questions regarding their experiences specifically with people and things that had happened to them while they were in Oxnard schools. Our research questions became: in what ways are urban schools in Oxnard succeeding? What are important indicators that contribute to the success of urban schools in Oxnard? And what are the positive things happening in urban schools in Oxnard for the students that attend? We do think, and a lot of the information that we had received back was that they were happy to be responding to something in a positive manner. So we were happy to be a part of taking their information from that.
Okay. All right. So then we get into our findings and our emerging themes. So as we work through kind of our surveys, went through the coding aspect of it, and looked for overarching themes, we came across 4 kind of subgroups that came about, which was perseverance, high expectations, caring teacher, and culture. And those were the 4 things that they're doing a great job of. Those are the things that the students, the 28 respondents, kind of was the most occurring answers, because they felt that connection to the school and that caring teacher led them to being successful. Here is one of our charts. So quickly we'll go over three charts from some of the other questions that we asked. So it says, I feel Oxnard teachers understood me. As you can see on a 1 through 5 scale, with 5 being the highest, predominantly it was 5 was answered there. So they felt the teachers understood them. It was kind of so you're seeing that connection, you're seeing that overarching theme. We also saw that predominantly a 5 again on feeling proud to have gone to Oxnard schools. So again, that sense of connectedness, that school connectedness is there, that feature. There's a sense of pride from the community. And then we also get into our third question, Webb, I feel Oxnard School has prepared me for life after high school. Now, this one wasn't as strong as the other ones, but it's still right skewed, so you can kind of see that it still has a 4 or 5 combo of a higher level which means they do feel it kind of provided them that opportunity for after schools. And again, this is coming from our 28 respondents. And so kind of in the conclusion of that, from the data that we had kind of come to was that there is a strong sense of social emotional going on. So that's kind of the theme that's going around right now. We see that Oxnard Schools does a good job of that. They are connecting with their students. There is a social emotional piece that's there. The caring teachers are present. They are teaching the kids to persevere, and there is a sense of accountability. But there's also that high quality evidence-based SEL, which is socio-emotional learning programs that are evident, and that came through talking with surveying the respondents. And then we kind of looked at it from a form of educational reform. So how does it tie back to what we've learned these last 8 weeks on ed reform, whether it be Theory U, fifth discipline, adaptive leadership? What are we seeing that the leaders within these schools are doing to help with that? So we see from Senge, the interrelationship rather than things. So they're focusing on that connection. They're focusing on their relationships, and that's helping them. They're operating to the whole. So they're trying to get the best out of each individual to kind of go in through and succeed as a whole. And they're seeing at that. And then they're also coming at it from an open mind, open heart, and an open will. Which is what we kind of came to that conclusion of those survey respondents, looking at those answers with the caring teacher aspect and all the way through. So that's kind of how we kind of tied in ed reform at the end there. But overall, we're seeing a very strong sense of connectedness, a very strong sense of the social emotional piece, and an element of perseverance that is taking place at Oxnard Schools.
It was very unique to hear the stories of the survey respondents where they were sharing examples of where teachers had gone above and beyond to help them succeed. And this even continued on after high school in some of the examples that were provided for us. So this was a very interesting study to do, especially being focused on such a positive swing.
Yeah, one of the respondents highlighted how even after high school, their teacher helped them get a job. And it just showed how caring their teacher was and how that connection that they had.
And that is all. That's our info. Does anybody have any questions?
I have a question, if I may.
Yeah.
It's Nadia.
Nadia.
Hi. So you talked about the participants, and you had 28 students, but I was curious, how did you recruit those students?
So
past students.
So they're past students, yeah, they're former students. They were all over the age of 18, so that our IRB was good. Everything was confidential and everything. We used email, social media, personal connections. I mean, we're close to Oxnard, so there was an easy way for us to get it out there. And then the only precedent was that they had to have gone through Oxnard Schools and be over the age of 18 in order to participate. And for such a short amount of time, 28 participants, we thought was a pretty good number.
No, definitely. I was just curious. Thank you.
It was a pretty extensive survey for them to work through. So to get 28 to do it, we were very excited.
Jack, did you have a question?
Yeah. Were the selected population, were they from all 4 of the districts in Oxnard?
Yes. Yes. We encompassed all of Oxnard as the city of Oxnard and Oxnard schools.
I don't, we didn't ask what other schools they had attended. We asked if they had attended school. I would say 24 of the 28 attended school, high school, or graduated from high school from one of the Oxnard high schools, so Pacifica, Wainini, or Oxnard. I think we even had one response that might have been Rio.
Yeah.
But some of the others had experiences at one point or another with a middle school or an elementary school in Oxnard.
So in looking at your findings, hi everyone, looking at your findings, what would you say would be a great area to do further research in around this topic?
Well, we definitely think that further research should be done with more participants. It would be great if you could actually get students who are in the system currently. That's a whole other thing, we're sure. But we think that it should really be looked at from the social emotional learning lens, from the relationship part of everything. I know that most studies tend to look at the academic part. And so we've really seen, especially in the literature and the responses from our participants, that the emotional connections should be looked at further in the success of why students succeed, that it tends to be more of an emotional and a social connectedness to the school and or adults that are in the school.
With all those, the caring teacher, the perseverance, even the culturally relevant pedagogy, all kind of fell under that framework.
I would say that, you could take this down to survey within a school system and really look at the relationships that exist within the school and examine student connectedness. Examine student connectedness and then really evaluate, maybe even survey students and how they feel about their relationships with teachers, and teachers how they feel about relationships with their students. It really boiled down to that one person stopping to take the time.
Yeah.
And in the responses, you could see that was evident, that there was one person that stopped and made a difference. So there's a lot of opportunities here to open it up for research.
And I see, Ken, I see your question about, are we concerned that our 28 respondents could have been skewed to those who were just having a positive experience? That's a great question. Of course, we wonder if the ones who were more willing to put it out there were the ones that had the positive experiences. So that would be definitely a place for future research to think about how to look at it as a broader perspective.
I see the chat questions on the side. Did you see those?
That's what I've answered.
Oh, great.
So yeah, we definitely see that, and having a control group and all of that would be great.
We did
In the
have
couple
some
weeks
that-
we had,
28 respondents in 2 weeks is not bad.
right?
We also had some people respond with, my experience wasn't that great. I think there were two people that, or two respondents that really responded with, they did not have a good experience, and those answers were evident. But 2 of the 28, we had that.
And no, Amy, we did not have anybody in Camarillo. We had to use Oxnard specifically as the urban demographic that we were looking at, we wanted them to be in an urban area, and Oxnard identifies in our definitions and statistics definition as an urban city.
I'll jump in just to let everyone know those were the constraints within which the group was working. It had to be an urban school, and they had to find out what was working in an urban school. And that was the constraint set up for them from the call for papers that was used to shape their study. So they didn't have, the group didn't have parameters to shape the study in certain ways because of what they were shooting for, what the target was.
But we think we hit our target pretty well.
Yeah. Well, if we don't have any other questions for the group, let's give them a round of applause. Nicely done, right?
Thank you.
Nicely done. Thank you. Okay, I would like next to introduce Allison's group. Allison, is your group ready?
Yep.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to let you introduce yourselves. I forgot to have the other group do that, but maybe we should do that because not everyone on remembers who everyone is and Ken hasn't met all of us. So why don't you first, I'll say your names so they'll know who's presenting.
Amy Simpler, hi.
Allison Raygoza.
Carolyn Bernal.
Ashley LaJoy.
Nadia Manasa.
That's our group.
Okay, so we're going to get started. We were looking at gender bias in the position of superintendency. So really what we were wanting to identify were any issues that were surrounding women in the superintendency. So a quick overview of the Lit Review is that there's not a lot of women in that position nationwide, just over 20%. And kind of the irony is that women are the majority in education, both in teaching and staff positions. So the way we wanted to approach our study was to not only look at what it takes to get to that position from the female's perspective, but also from a male's perspective, and try to see if we could find any differences in what both parts thought of what it took to get there. And we were really thoughtful in how we tried to phrase our questions so that we didn't produce any bias. We wanted real, honest answers from the folks that we interviewed. So I don't want to get too much into the methodology because we're going to move into that. But that just kind of frames what we were looking at for our study.
So the 3 research questions are, what are the leadership qualities that a superintendent needs to possess in order to have a successful tenure? And the second is, what barriers, challenges, and opportunities do superintendents experience in the role of superintendent? And then what commonalities exist as it relates to the career pathway towards becoming a superintendent? And we'll go into each of those in greater detail in just a minute.
So then our methodology really consisted of 3 items. The first is, you guys can see, the demographic survey. Just ask them to list some basic things like their birth year, how long they've been in, tenured as a superintendent, their marital status, things like that. You'll actually get some answers on the next slide. And then we use the Bowman and Deals leadership orientation instrument to try to figure out how they individually assess their leadership skills, and we'll talk about those results in a second. And most importantly, the 3 research questions that Amy just presented were actually asked in a personal interview. So it was a semi-structured interview where we wanted to make sure we focus on the 3 questions, but if there was any clarifications or follow-up needed, our focus was then we could, ask them to reiterate or expand on something that they mentioned. So there was like no lead in, because we didn't want to obviously bias their results.
So our participant samples, we had, as Nadia said, we interviewed superintendents, 6, 3 were females and 3 were males. They were all either current or former superintendents. Their tenure range from 5 months to 14 years, and their age range was from 41 to 61.
So when we started looking at what our findings would be, we really broke it down based on the question. So if you recall, the first research question was regarding what leadership qualities an individual would need to possess and to be successful as a superintendent. So we really broke it down by gender. The female themes were the ability to communicate effectively, both to your staff, to the community, kind of overall. And then really as a sub-theme was this idea of soft language. So they couldn't just come out and say, I need this done, I need it done by Wednesday, and this is how we're going to do it. It was very, I think we should try, or I would encourage you to look at, all of the women talked about vision and the need to be a visionary and communicate a vision and have a really strong vision to run your organization. And the ability to build relationships, both within your organization. One of the respondents actually said, most of my day is just talking to people. Sometimes I leave and I think, oh, I didn't get anything done today because all I did was talk to anybody. And so that was a real adjustment for her to make. The male themes were that there really wasn't a lot of overlap. We really looked hard at trying to find the same ideas within the 3 interviews, and they weren't as cohesive as cohesive is the wrong word, but as overlapping as the female responses. So when we looked at comparing them, we noticed that the females' responses were very interpersonal, very person-oriented, whereas a lot of the males talked about organizational achievement. So I'm doing well if my institution or my organization is doing well, versus, some of the things that the women were saying. So one other area that's not up there for female themes is this idea. The women were aware that they were females in leadership positions. So to quote one of our superintendents, she said, the whole bit of being a female soup is real. And just story after story of things that she encountered as a female that she didn't feel she would have encountered if she was a male, whereas none of our males explicitly talked about being a male in that role. So that was a really big difference that we found for our first question.
And so for the Bowman and Deals 4 frameworks, you can see there's, this is separated by gender. And so you have the first 3 females on top and the males on the bottom. And then what I did is I basically added up their scores. This was a 32-item questionnaire that every individual went through and responded, appropriately as how they respond to whatever the scenario was. And for females, their top score for all of them was in the HR model, which makes sense, especially with what Ashley just said, which their focus was really interpersonal in nature. But for males, no such trends emerged. But one of the things that Bowman and Deal talk about is that individuals who lead using multiple frameworks obviously are going to be more successful and so on and so forth. And so overall, we found that there were 3 superintendents who relied on a paired framework approach. And the way that this is, the results basically, anything over 32 and above is a framework that is utilized by the person. And then 2 of the superintendents relied on a multi-frame approach. And multi-frame in this sense meant actually 3 frameworks. And one person, M1, if you look at their scores, that individual never reached the minimum requirement. So we kind of, in terms of this, the LOI results, he's not included in the outcome. So we thought that was kind of interesting to see the trend in females and really no specific trends in the males.
So after we developed our question 2, looking at the barriers and the challenges, we realized it aligned very well with the SWOT. And so, SWOT's been around since 1950. It's just one way to examine the environment around an issue in an organization. So it allows organizations to explore the interconnections prior to making decisions or changes.
So the female SWOT findings, we, as Nadia and Ashley had stated before, we found common themes that emerged. But strengths that were identified by more than one female participant was building relationships. Weaknesses were overturning decisions and gender inequality from the board and community. Opportunities highlighted were the impact you make on a large number of students. And then the females identified threats, which were identified by more than one participant, were limited resources and the board. So for the male, the strengths that they identified, and it was identified by more than one, was being able to treat others equitably. Common weaknesses among male participants were raising expectations and changing other people's perspectives. The men identified really one opportunity, and that's when you have a very supportive board. And then threats that were noted by the males were time management and prioritization.
And then just kind of tying it together, the comparison findings for both male and female were the strength of communication and relationship building, as well as the opportunity that lies within the Board of Trustees. So I would say at least 5 out of 6 of the participants talked about the board. That was very common. And then male participants defined more threats and weaknesses, and the female participants defined more strengths and opportunities just overall.
Okay, so the last question we talked about was the career pathway of both the female and male superintendents. And the females all had similar pathways. They did not talk about a different career prior to going into education. That was their first career. All 3 of them followed a traditional pathway. 2 of the 3 were first a teacher and then a site administrator. Then they became a district level administrator, and then they became the superintendent. And one of the 3 started out as an instructional assistant, then went on to be a teacher, a site administrator, skipped to the district level administrator altogether, and went straight to the superintendency from the principalship. Things they talked about related to career pathway That all three of them expressed that their varied roles that they held in education leading up to the superintendency definitely better prepared them for that position. And they also expressed that it wasn't as important how much time they spent in each position, but how effective they were in each position as a leader, and also how much knowledge they were able to gain while in each particular position leading up to the superintendency. The males, two of the three males took what we call like a right turn into education, meaning they weren't initially going to go into education. One was a music major, one was an art major, but both had some experiences prior to going into education that made them realize they wanted to make a difference in the lives of children. One of the three males even followed his heart, or as Allison said, followed the love of a woman into education, which was kind of fun to hear from that male superintendent. All three of them had similar pathways in that they were a teacher, a site administrator, a district level administrator, and then became a superintendent. One of the three also held the position of instructional assistant as his first intro into education. The males didn't really have any common themes. They all spoke about their pathway differently. One of the males spoke to the job of superintendent as being a million jobs in one. He talked about scaling, meaning going from the microgranular to the big picture and back, and that he sees his role in the bigger picture as making a difference for kids. One spoke to his upbringing. His father was a migrant farm worker, and so he wanted to connect back with that same population and make a difference for kids. And then one spoke to the opportunity for growth. He always wanted to, he always considered himself a fixer. And once he got to the role of superintendent, he realized that he can't fix it all, and instead he needs to challenge the barriers and challenge his team. So in concluding our study, we found that, so overall there were no common themes between the male and female responses, with the exception of career pathway, because once they got into education, whether it was their the first thing they chose to do or not, they all followed a version of a traditional pathway towards becoming the superintendent. The female themes were all about communication, vision, relationships, and all three of them spoke to a variety of examples or instances where they had experienced some gender bias. And then through the SWOT analysis, our females identified more strengths and opportunities than threats and weaknesses. And the males, they all answered very uniquely. They did not have a lot of overlap at all. There were no really common themes we could find. And they did not talk about gender bias at all. And through the SWOT analysis, they actually identified more threats and weaknesses than strengths and opportunities. Finally, we talked, as we came to closing this case study and looking at all of what we found out, we thought about what the recommendations would be for future research. One, definitely, if we had more time to do this a lot longer, we would definitely increase our sample size, maybe even consider interviewing or surveying a variety of stakeholders regarding this topic, not just superintendents. We would want to ask the same questions as they relate to the opposite gender. So have the males talk about what they think a female needs to have in terms of leadership qualities to be successful, what a male thinks a female encounters as the barriers and challenges and opportunities, and then vice versa, ask the females about the males. We could thought about the differences between superintendents and chancellors, because we have chancellors at the higher ed level, and so thinking about female chancellors and male chancellors, and are there differences there. We also thought about the mentoring. We know a lot of our superintendents get mentors assigned to them, and talk and explore more who mentored them and then what their experience was like as a mentee. One of our female superintendents said that her mentor told her specifically not to be a superintendent in a high school district because she had small children, and that as a high school superintendent you would be gone several nights a week, and so she wouldn't be able to be there for her small children. So that was an example of some gender bias that she experienced from her mentor. Finally, we thought about exploring further a woman's choice to pursue the superintendency, both what the limitations and opportunities are. Nowadays, and it's not like how it was, a lot of men are choosing to stay home or be stay-at-home dads, or are accepting the female as the breadwinner in the family. And so it would be interesting to explore how that influences the female's choice, whether to pursue superintendency or not. And that's it. Are there any questions?
Thank you. My question is, can you hear me? Did I unmute myself? Okay, so my question, sorry, my question is for the career pathways. If women focus on the relationship and building, is there, like, did you also assess the time frame? Like, do males go into the superintendent role faster than females do? And then my part 2 question is, does having fiscal oversight as your background have any influence on, typically men have, I guess, I don't know if it's a gender bias, but do they look at people with more experiences in fiscal operations versus in oversight of a school district?
You guys want me to answer the first part?
Go ahead.
Okay. So your first question was about, do men get to the superintendency position faster than women? Was that kind of the general question? Mm-hmm. We didn't, you know what, they told us their career pathway. You know, I was a teacher, I was this, I was that. They didn't, some went specifically into how long they held each position, some didn't. So I wouldn't be able to answer who got to the superintendency faster or not between the sample size, but that would be a good area to explore.
Can you restate your second question, Celine? I'm sorry. Oh, the second question, I was just curious. I don't really know what the role and responsibility entails for superintendents, but having fiscal knowledge, fiscal operation knowledge on a multiple level, does that have any influence as far as the gender? I don't think so. In fact, only one of the superintendents had been the assistant soup of budget and finance before she took her role. And then one of the female superintendents went straight from administrator to the superintendency role. So, no, I don't think that played a factor.
Ken, I saw your question on the gender and equity. We saw a lot of that actually in our lit review that we did, and board members are what they call the gatekeeper. They're one of the gatekeepers. Because for K-12 or P-12 schools, they hire the superintendent. That's the one position they get to hire and fire. And so they're considered one of the major gatekeepers, along with headhunting companies. They're also considered gatekeepers. So our lit review portion of our paper delved pretty deeply into that and what their role is.
So we are right about at time for this group. So unless someone has a last minute question they want to ask, anybody?
Well, Catherine just popped up.
Okay.
And we had that conversation last night. The Ventura County SUP is an elected position. So the board doesn't hire or fire. That's an elected position. And so that would be another interesting avenue to explore. Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's give our second group here a round of applause for great stuff tonight. Thank you. Appreciated your focus on the detail. And we're going to move on to our third group who has completed research, and this is Tasha's group. Tasha, is your group ready?
Yes.
Okay, you may take over.
Okay. Let's make sure.
Hi, everyone. Do we want us to introduce ourselves?
Yes, please. I forgot to say that. Please introduce yourselves first.
I'm Nicole Rodriguez.
I'm Noemi Ornelas.
I'm Celine Park.
And Celine.
And Celine Park.
So our topic is on a collaborative approach to development of pathways in linked learning. So it's important to point out that our research was guided by a research study done by a group in this particular class at California State University, Fresno. And their topic was a little bit different, but we built our research or opportunity for the case study off of their particular topic, which was a review of California Career Pathways Trust programs on student success and job readiness. So I say that because it will guide us into our presentation. So in our presentation, we just wanted to give you an overview of what to expect in our presentation. So we'll talk a little bit about the introduction, the lit review, our conceptual framework, research questions that guided our study, methodology, our participant sample, findings, and then the conclusion. And in the conclusion, we'll also talk about our limitations and also opportunities for future research. So as we begin an introduction into our topic of linked learning and how that really guides student success, I wanted to mention that in April 2016, Obama, he did his State of the Union address, and I'm not sure if everybody had the opportunity to hear that, but what he called for was more robust job training at both the high school and college level. So the focus and the attention were to ensure that young people gain work experience, skills, networks that would allow them or contribute to success and continuing on success for future populations to come or future generations to come. So in that, in 2014, the California Department of Education called for a request for proposals. And they went ahead and they called, to California State high schools, community colleges, charter schools, which really carried a weight of $500 million in competitive grant funding. So a lot of schools applied for this grant funding with the hopes of being able to develop a CCPT program. And CCPT stands for the California Career Pathways Trust. So under the CCPT, which we'll refer to it moving forward, there's linked learning. And linked learning really are programs designed to prepare our students for a few different areas. First, for workforce demands. We need to be able to assist our students, especially at the high school level, to prepare for the industries, especially industries with a low amount of workers transitioning into those areas. The other is project-based learning, so career and technical education, work-based learning, but also addressing the shortages that we are seeing in high-growth industries. So I also wanted to mention, as we have noted there, that dual enrollment is a component of linked learning. And that's important to mention because California has already allocated more than $1.5 billion over the next 5 years in CTE education. So that's something that we want to make sure we pay attention to. And then the final piece is student success. So why we do all this is for our students. It's to build opportunities for them. It's to create a better tomorrow for all of us and for our children and the future children to come or the future populations to come. So I say that these three areas are really important when it comes to linked learning. And that is allowing our students the opportunity in the classroom to get college prep academics, theme curriculum, practical experience. These are all important because it'll allow our students to get a head start, it'll allow them to grow. And sometimes we even see some tuition costs involved because it lowers their tuition cost in the long run. What really we want to focus on is the collaboration and communication piece. So as we move forward in the remaining parts of the presentation, you'll notice that we continually go back to the collaboration and communication piece. These programs could not exist without the partnerships between the high schools, community colleges, and the four-year institutions around active communication, which is obviously crucial to the success of the programs.
Okay. So our literature review focused on 3 core elements in designing career pathways. The first is the development of a coherent sequence of courses. The second is work-based learning experiences. And the third is project-based learning. So first I want to start off that by definition, a pathway is defined as a systemic framework which connects a series of courses with integrated work experiences. The goal here in the CCPT grant is to develop career exploration. We want to provide college credit for high school students and get students prepared to enter the workforce for high growth, high paying jobs. So our case study focused on these 3 components using Sharmer's cross-functional concept of communication to show the importance of improving communication and strengthening our partnership with our stakeholders. Sharmer talks about the 4 stages of listening by cultivating our listening skills through authentic dialogue. So really what we need to do is we need to create deeper connections rather than debating. We need to have dialogue with each other. We want to create a culture of trust and shared leadership. Our study talks about how we need to build pathways and build strong relationships. And we do this through planning, development, implementation, and continuous improvement in aligning high school curriculum with community college and 4-year institution curriculum. We need to establish positive working relationships, and this won't happen unless we can provide personalized support to the teachers, the faculty, and to our businesses in the community. So the studies have supported Sharmer's theory in that we need to first and foremost build relationships. That's the key. And by doing that, we need to make them feel included when we redesign and redevelop curriculum. Okay, so developing rigorous courses involves collaboration and communication between high school teachers and faculty. So articulation agreements are vital to career pathways. This is the key component in achieving academic success for our students. Articulation agreements are these bilateral agreements where 2 institutions with related curriculum allow credit from a college program to be transferred to high school or 4-year institutions. So as an articulation officer for the community college system for 5 years, I can tell you first and foremost that it's really difficult to build these articulation agreements between teachers and faculty without having trust and a relationship built. That is the key ingredient. Otherwise, it's almost impossible to develop these articulation agreements and these contracts. Work-based learning is also called learning by doing, and this includes providing guest speakers in the classrooms, providing field trips for our students, job shadowing, internships, apprenticeships, facilitating career fairs on campus and at high schools, providing our students with mock interviews so students can get the soft skill communications where they can practice interviewing for jobs. Through work-based learning, students get real work experiences. Researchers talk about the importance of developing partnerships again with local industry employers. This is because we need to have these relationships built with employers because they play this critical role in providing training opportunities for our students. They're the ones who provide internships at the schools and at the colleges. They're the ones who provide us with job shadowing and apprenticeships. Also, they need to be part of the development of curriculum from secondary to post-secondary institutions because they're the ones who help provide feedback in developing the outcomes of the curriculum. The outcomes, the student learning outcomes, are crosswalked with industry skills standards. So essentially, we need to make sure that the curriculum meets the labor market demands of what skills are needed for students to get jobs in the workforce. And then lastly, project-based learning. This approach is where realistic projects are embedded in the schools and the colleges. Students work together as a team. They work together to gain a deeper understanding of real-world problems. This goes back again to soft skills communication. The workforce expects our students to understand what teamwork is like. They expect our students to know how to come to work on time, how to communicate, how to write an email. These are things that they don't learn in the classroom. These are things that they can learn through project-based learning. The integration of all of these involves employers and educators. Finally, collaboration is vital in the success of the career pathways. As Sharma points out, it requires creating a culture that fosters engagement in an atmosphere of trust.
So what we found in the gaps during the lit review is this piece that kept coming back with communication. And we wanted to find out that there were, or we can find out that there were these gaps surrounding the communication pipelines. So we came up with 2 research questions, which are: how are the P through 12 community colleges and four-year institutions engaged in the communication with one another to transition the students through the pathways from, either K through 12 community college to 4-year, or somewhere down that road. And also, is there a relationship between P through 12 community colleges and 4-year institutions to improve the delivery of these communication or CCPT pathways through due enrollment programs? So it's high school to community college to the 4-year university. What we did in our methodology was we designed a qualitative survey. We looked and again, looking at the communication pathways to be able to come up with the goal of making this meaningful and construct knowledge, to be able to see what are some of the things that are working well within these existing institutions. And we focused on Ventura County specifically. So this is just a snapshot of our participants and respondents. Through Ventura County, we looked at 11 different participants who currently work within CCPT. We looked at 3 different high schools and 3 different community colleges. And then resulting from that, in terms of the respondents, we ended up with 3 teachers who worked in the high schools and 2 faculty who worked in the community colleges. 3 of which were male and 2 were female. We had a very short window, as the rest of you know, but some of our visitors, a very short window when it came to this design. So we were able to email the qualitative survey and of course the informed consent form to the participants with the 3 open-ended questions. And we had a 2-week response period. And what we discovered with our limitations is the timing of the survey. And I don't know if you guys received this as well, but our survey ended up going out right before Thanksgiving break to P through 12 and community colleges and the 4-year. What we ended up with was 0 administrators responding to our survey, and we were not able to identify in the time frame people within the 4-year institution. So those were our limitations in particular. So when we come to our findings, we ended up with 3 different themes. The articulation themes, which is what was mentioned before, and that came up actually with our literature review. We came up with themes surrounding communication experience as well as timeliness of information. So with the articulation committees, 3 of the 5 took part in some role with the articulation. And as Celine had mentioned, these are groups that you have to communicate with. So they were communicating based off of their grading rubric, specific content. There was even an example of somebody sharing common exams. So they used common exams between the high schools and the community colleges. With their communication experience, 3 of 5 of them stressed that the in-person or at least interactive type of communication was critical. So if they weren't able to be in person, if it was some sort of a live webinar. Another participant mentioned about a 2-day event where they had high school participants interacting directly with the college faculty. So that in-person interactive communication was critical. And then the 3rd theme which emerged from our surveys was this timeliness of information, or really it's the lack of timing within information. There was, due to conflicting schedules, there were lag times in between responses to emails. It made it very difficult to schedule the in-person trainings because of the various time commitments based off of the P12 teachers and the faculty at the community colleges. And so that was another theme that kept emerging.
And so what we found was that, the Career Pathways has created so many more opportunities to integrate various systems, educational systems, and the future of our economic vitality. It really relies on, our, on the success of our students, whether it be in a career or going to college. And what Sharma really talked about was this emerging complexity. And within this career pathway system, we really found that was the case. There's a level of engagement, a deeper engagement that's required. And throughout our research and in our literature review, what we saw was exactly what Sharma described in his book and his theories about we're touching the surface. We're not digging in deeper. We're following all of the policies and procedures that are required to meet the objectives of CCPT, but yet we're not really getting to the core of cross-functional design and learning for the emerging future. One of the things that he talks about are the two sources of learning, and we're focusing on learning from the past versus learning from the future. So we're looking at collapsing our boundaries and really integrating our efforts to really make sure that this program is successful. One of our recommended recommendations for future research is connecting with the four-year universities. That was definitely a gap that we saw. And although we don't know exactly why, we think that it's because of the communication and just so many processes that are in place that we haven't gotten that deep to begin to connect with our four-year universities. And also looking at more professional development where people are able to interact in person and engage at that deeper level. Some of the research found that they were doing a lot of communication via email. So once again, that's not interactive. It's just trying to meet or check off another box to meet a standard. And so really focusing on student success, but trying a different approach for the future. That's it.
Anyone have any questions?
We answered all your questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
In the articulation agreements, when the kids did the 2+2 and reviewing the transcripts, how many of those kids actually took advantage of the courses to the next level at the community college?
Well, our case study was more on the communication pathways of it. Are the teachers at the high school communicating with the community college? Or is the community college communicating with the four-year? And to be honest with you, what we're finding formally and informally is it's not. That there's there's a step where the high school teachers are communicating with the community college teachers, but that's kind of where it stops. We're just barely there. It's not that deeper level of learning that Schwarmer was talking about, and especially with being able to develop from the future to really truly implement some of these systems. So in terms of your question about how many of the kids take advantage of it, that wasn't something that we even got into with the CCPT.
There's a lot of research on that, Steve, and the answer is that a lot of students don't. And it is due to what we've just talked about, is this lack of knowledge and lack of communication. So we're telling students to do something, and then there's no follow through or direction in terms of how to actually get the articulation piece taken care of.
So whose fault is that?
I think it's the systems. I mean, if I were to have to answer, community college systems are actually now adopting a statewide model to offer a software to be able to track our students, to be able to put all of this together so that if students are going from college to college, or they do land at a particular community college, there's a method to begin to offer credit for students.
Yeah. I wanted to add that to Steve, your question, outside of our research, part of my responsibility with the CCPT grant was to track students who petition for college credit. So for year 3, I reported to the CDE. We had 3,500 students who were pathways related for college credit. However, that doesn't necessarily mean those students who received college credit will all enter the community college system into the 4-year institution. So like Noemi said, we don't have a mechanism yet in place, a database that can track those students who matriculate into the community colleges and transfer to a 4-year. I have been trying to work on that, but unfortunately, I don't have those numbers yet.
I'm going to jump in really quick. I think Ginger's question on the discussion board would make a great dissertation. But I want to take the group back to Ken's question, because all of us in the class know what we're talking about when you said Sharmer's scratching the surface, but our guests don't know about that Sharmer's work in Theory U. I was wondering if the group would quickly fill in so that it would make sense to our guests.
Yeah, so I can address that. Okay. So one of the concepts that Sharmer talks about is, this U right here, right? And the U he provides a lot of different examples of how we can go from one place to another. And the U can symbolize a lot of different systems or a person. But touching the surface, what he refers to is he draws a lot of different analysis. But if, for example, you're looking at a tree, and you can't see the roots of a tree, but you see the actual trunk and the leaves. And in order to have that tree grow and blossom, you need to take care of the roots by watering them and nurturing them. And so he references the surface a lot, where, when we're working on a policy or maybe interacting with people, it's not, we don't always get to that deeper level to connecting with one another. So he's constantly talking about this level of engagement that really involves a lot of deep thought and involvement versus just, hi, how are you? Or the day-to-day pieces. And it references throughout the book that as humans, we have this, he calls it social technology. And I really enjoyed that concept because it's using us as the technology. We're the resource to really make that futuristic change and really emerge through the future. And he says that we learn 2 different ways. You can learn by looking at the past, which is what we historically do and continue to fail, or you can look at the future and you're going into an unknown, and the future sometimes has these failures, but it gives you an opportunity to begin to look deeper and learn a different way to create change. And I'm not sure if anyone else wants to add to that.
You did a great job summarizing.
It's excellent. Mm-hmm. So if we don't have any other questions for the group, I'd love to give this group a round of applause. Very nice job there, as everyone else has done so far too. Thank you. We're now moving to our next group, and that is Kathy's group. Kathy, are you ready? Is she there?
Yeah, I just have to unmute.
Okay.
So this is Ryan Eller, Ryan Monterey Bay, Ryan, and Kathy Resnick. So I'll get started here.
Just before, I'm going to ask one question before you start. Am I missing a group, or is the only other group Pete and Steve after this?
Yes, you are missing the group on women.
That's what I thought. Okay, I'm missing a group. I have my list is not correct in front of me. Yes. Okay, thank you. You are going to be next because I said that Pete and Steve could go last. They're situated right now, but we're going to let them go last since they had the most technical difficulties. So.
Sounds good.
Okay, Catherine, thank you. Go ahead.
Okie dokie. So, let me start from the beginning. Sorry about that. supposed to start from the beginning, but that's okay. We'll start this way.
You're giving
All
us a preview.
Yeah. Did you read all that?
Yeah.
Okay, we're done. Awesome. So our task was to look at neoliberalism and teacher education programs in higher education, and the idea of teacher preparation in the state of California within that context. So I thought it was really interesting that we're going after the group that talked primarily about changing education to make it more focused on job skills and really building that, when the whole argument against neoliberalism's impact on education is that we focus too much on just doing job skills and not on a cohesive educational system. So it was an interesting contrast, and I sit somewhere in the middle. So
life is a juxtaposition, right?
It is. So as our introduction, just to give a little context, the idea of neoliberalism is really about shifting the role of government from regulating to enabling markets. So instead of government kind of regulating the process, the role of government is seen as an enabler of markets, and that the role is to replace public service with private enterprise. So we need to rethink how our whole system works, and the government needs to get out of the public service, and it needs to allow private enterprise to take over, because they're going to do a much better job at a cheaper price, and it's going to be amazing. So that's
only if you agree with that, right?
I'm just stating what the framework is. I'm not saying I agree.
I'm just doing that for your colleagues so they know where you stand. Okay.
So there is some work on the idea of the impact of neoliberalism on education in general, but our specific task was to focus on teacher education programs. And there's a lot of work done by Christine Sleater on this topic that we found that really gave context to the questions. And so if you look here, the ideas of the push and pull between kind of our traditional models of education and then the ideas being framed by the neoliberalistic or the neoliberalistic agenda is that we need to move away from that we're moving away from multicultural, equity oriented, and the pressures are pushing teachers to become more technicians. So that the education is no longer, its primary focus is the preparation of students or people to be highly qualified, active participants in the democratic process, but yet we're just trying to turn out groups of people who can get a job and do the skills that the market needs. So the market's missing the skilled labor, so let's transform our schools to deliver what the market needs. And again, this is the context of what the research states. And the idea of teachers as technicians is really about teachers being able to implement a prescribed curriculum package rather than to have kind of their own style and thoughts and to move away from kind of that local personal control to more systematic, standardized delivery of things. And then the other idea impacting teacher education programs is the idea of moving from the idea of developing professional knowledge to the idea of moving towards creating testable content knowledge. So this whole movement towards accountability systems and teachers being able to test out of teacher education programs is seen within the context of this idea of neoliberalism. Along that line, you also get some of the shortening of the university-based programs. We've got to get teachers in and out, or even skipping them altogether. And so there's a lot of stuff tied in with this idea of what kind of impact is this going to have or is having on current teacher education programs. So our research questions were 3, and our first one was, how have teacher credentialing programs in higher education changed over the last 20 years? Do we see a big shift in those education programs? What are some of the common contextual variables of teacher education programs when you look at private, public, and for-profit institutions? Do we see similar things, or do we see differences? And then what are the components? Sorry, my screen's in the way here. What are the components of 21st century teaching and learning, and how are they integrated into teacher credentialing programs in the private, public, and the for-profit institutions? That was one of the contexts of our case study. So I'm going to turn this over to Ryan to talk about the methodology and some of the other processes and some of our findings.
Yeah, absolutely. So our methodology, we took a somewhat different approach comparative to some of the case studies that have been presented tonight. What we started with was actually a program review of teacher credentialing programs across the state, and to help identify institutions that actually have teacher credential programs. We didn't want to necessarily just hunt and peck through different schools and see which ones did or did not have those programs. So we used 2 databases to identify schools that did have these programs. The first was the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing website, and the second was College Board, that also had a search function to kind of tie down schools with certain majors and certain programs. So through that, we identified 86 institutions that fit our study. They're all based in California because our study is based in California. They're all 4-year institutions, and they all offer credentialing programs on a variety of topics. So we decided to also use contextual variables because it was likely that a lot of schools would have a different kind of outlook, not necessarily explicitly stating factors that neoliberalism has on them, but that their location, the type of university that they are, the total enrollment of their students, what type of credentialing programs they have, and what grades they certify could inform some of the impacts that neoliberalism has had on those institutions and how that impacts how they train teachers. Of course, what we also did was we followed this up with an online survey with faculty who work within teacher education programs across the state. And that had 5 sections that we looked at: general information of both their programs, faculty that worked within those programs, a description of the current program that they're in and the trends that that program is working towards obtaining. Their program focused on particular topics. Some had a focus on things such as educational technology, others were more broad. Current challenges in local school districts and how the benefits of hiring new teachers impact those school districts was the question that we asked them. And then we followed up and ended with how 21st century teaching and learning is woven into their program. Okay, so to start off with our participant sample of our survey folks, we were really looking to get folks from each type of university, public, private, or for-profit. Unfortunately, we did have a for-profit person who opted in to take the study, and then at the last minute they decided to opt out because they'd actually been working with a teacher credentialing program based outside of California, even though their university worked in multiple states. So with that, we ended up getting a kind of diverse group of program directors, professors, a dean, and a few department chairs as well. We had a total of 5 participants who took our survey. So we got a wide demographic distribution in terms of male and female, about 60% female, 40% male, a wide variety of ages, a wide variety of years within the positions that they worked. Most of the programs are probably relatively new in terms of the history and length of California programs that offer teacher credentialing programs. And 2 of them noted very early on that their programs are in a constant state of redesign because they're relatively new programs, and they feel that they need to be redesigned to meet the needs of new Common Core state standards, and also to try to work towards getting an NC-AATE accreditation at a national level as well. Okay. So for our program review, what we ended up finding was that most of the schools that offer teacher credentialing programs are within 4 major metropolitan areas, but within 2 major areas of the state. Primarily, you'll find a good majority of the teacher credentialing programs either in the San Francisco Bay Area or down near Los Angeles and San Diego. There was only about 10 to 12 schools that ended up outside of that geographic area. So what you find is that a primary focus of a lot of these teacher education programs is a focus on urban education and informing how teachers should best work within an urban setting. A lot of them had an impact and choice on, and we'll get a little bit further into this with the coding, but a lot of them talked about things not just about working in an urban school, but how compassion, how a multicultural education, those types of things inform a teacher in those schools in an impactful way for their students. As a breakdown for the institution types that we ended up doing program reviews for, a majority of them were private institutions. The next highest category was public institutions, and there's only a very few amount of for-profit institutions operating teacher credentialing programs within the state of California. Most of the student enrollment obviously follows suit within that. There's 2 major universities, though, that take up about 25% of student enrollment in the state. About 3,400 end up in National University, and then one of the for-profits, University of Phoenix, takes in a good considerable amount as well, about 1,500 students. So two universities dominate a large amount of the 20,000 students that are enrolled to become teachers in the state of California, which we found interesting. You can move ahead, Kat. Okay, so after looking at the different program materials, we went through about 200 to 300 web pages, a variety of handbooks from the different schools. We broke down common codes that we found within these different program materials, and we found that there was 3 primary categories that these codes fell within. The first category was program outcomes that the program felt that they had on teachers. Naturally, that led into the second category of teacher development, things that they felt teachers needed to have in terms of certain skill sets to bring within the classroom. Lastly, the category 3 is the impact ultimately that teachers would have on students, or the skills that they learn would have on students as well. And then we had about a good 6 or so subcategories that became really large themes throughout these. What we ended up doing, if you look at the graph to the left, is essentially we broke them down color thematically, essentially. Program outcomes, 2 of the major themes that popped up consistently was professional qualities. Not every program really stated what those professional qualities of a teacher was, but primarily it focused on instructional strategies that they could bring in to be effective into a variety of learning environments. Once again, primarily urban environments, since most of these schools found themselves in urban settings. Secondly, for the category of teacher development, they focused heavily on integrating technology and also the experience and practice needed to become a good teacher. So for integrating technology, you see that a lot of the programs are now implementing education technology courses within their teacher education programs, or they're looking to implement them. That was a very common response in our survey from our program faculty that responded to our survey. A good deal of them responded that if they don't have integrated technology within their program right now, they want to put it into their program so that teachers can better reach a larger student subset. From there, obviously, experience and practice teaching is critical within any program for teacher education. And there was a variety of ways that they could do this. Some programs even brought up technology as a way to do so, using things such as Teach Live, which is a simulation software, where basically you're almost in a kind of a fake reality, if you will, where you're practicing teaching, you're practicing parent-teacher conferences, all sorts of things. So you can start to see how some of the categories start to meld together, even though we tried to put them into certain themes. Lastly, a very common thing, and I think this probably most relates back to the topic of neoliberalism, is most programs had a very heavy focus on diversity and the needs of diverse students. And that's not just in terms of racial diversity, but linguistic diversity, socioeconomic statuses being a wide range of things. So you see that a lot of the programs have a focus on things such as social justice and equity, so that basically teachers can come in and be prepared to serve students from a variety of backgrounds and from a variety of socioeconomic statuses. Okay, so from our online survey, we did have both quantitative and qualitative questions that we asked them. We asked them roughly 18 questions on that survey. And since the for-profit institutions, we didn't have any respondents to that, we broke them down in responses from public versus private institutions. So we had 3 quantitative questions that were done on a Likert scale of 1 to 7. The first thing we asked them is if there's a significant difference in terms of, well, we asked them really what the emphasis on teacher scholarly training is, and there was a significant difference in that question. A majority of the private institutions brought up that they put a heavy emphasis on research and also practice, but research was very, very important to their to informing the students that would go on to become teachers. From there was no significant difference in terms of practice of teaching. That was probably pretty obvious of a question for us to ask. Any teacher education program is looking to create great teachers, so practice would be a key component of that, and that matched obviously the program review coding that we had done before. Lastly, we asked about student achievement, how that informs their program quality, and we got a variety of responses for this one because really the program faculty weren't sure if we were asking student achievement in terms of the teachers being educated or if it meant student achievement once those teachers went into work with the districts. So because of that, it might have impacted the reason why there was no significant difference. I'm not really sure, I'm just guessing, but more than anything, you saw that the ones that did focus in terms of student achievement in teacher education, they focused a lot on the outcome of obtaining a job after completion of the degree. And if they didn't do that, then they felt that the students hadn't quite gotten the achievement necessary from their program, whether it was their fault or the student's fault, to achieve it the next step. For the qualitative side, we saw a lot of common themes that we got from the program review. A heavy emphasis in these programs on multiculturalism, instructional design, meeting state standards and national standards, common trends within these programs. We're starting to focus on meeting the needs of English language learners, the changing demographics that are happening across the state of California in a variety of K-12 settings, changing California Commission on teaching credentialing requirements, and other things like recruitment for some of these programs were concerned that they were either going to over-recruit because a lot of programs emphasize on their website that it's easy to find a teaching job right now, while others felt that in their area it was harder to recruit students, and so that they were actually placing more emphasis on that than focusing on improving their program as a whole. Some of the current challenges and benefits kind of come similar to the trends as well, but there's English language learners that create both challenges and benefits for schools, low socioeconomic statuses, a variety of student needs, high turnover for teachers, low pay within these districts, especially with budget cuts, was a very common theme for a lot of these respondents to our survey. Technology skills being ever important and growing for both student success and both for the teachers to provide more adequate teaching materials. And then having high energy and high passion is a big benefit in hiring new teachers for districts. And then lastly, 21st century teaching and learning, very essential for student success across the board and integrated with both technology and within the school districts themselves.
Okay, so in concluding, based on kind of the literature review and what was set up to kind of be a really scary event, and at least in our research, didn't necessarily show itself in full force, which was nice to know. That even though there are trends that are transforming kind of how we think about education, and that we do have more of a focus on kind of job skills and job readiness and being available, that our teacher education programs are not abandoning the idea of also providing teachers with the opportunity to understand about teaching in a multicultural and diverse class and creating equity and valuing professional knowledge and preparing teachers to not only provide students with the skills needed to participate in the job market, but also to participate in the democratic process. So in summary, they kind of they they tend to cluster around the ability to understand the needs of students in urban settings, that these are some of the trends that they're working on, that they've emphasized the value of diversity and multicultural teaching and learning, that technology can be an equalizer both for students and for teachers, and an emphasis in professional knowledge. So recommendations for future research. One of the things that came up time and time again in the literature review was the idea that it's really, a lot of the onus is on the teacher education programs themselves to resist some of the temptations or the pulls of the neoliberalistic agenda, that it's as an organization, as an institution, it is our job to continue to develop the skills that teachers need to fully teach students in a diverse and equitable manner in a democratic society, while still making sure that we're providing students with the opportunities to be successful. And that means getting a job and earning a living. So there were three things that one of the authors pointed out, that the three pillars, she called them, for teaching education for equity and democracy. And those are preparing teachers for the everyday realities and the complexities of what they're going to face in the school districts themselves. So no sugarcoating, everybody, pie in the sky, but what are the real realities? And to make sure that there's a blend of both content knowledge and professional theoretical knowledge. It can't just all be, if you can pass a content knowledge test, then you could be a good teacher, because there's a lot more to it than just being good at your subject. And then one of the primary ones, which I think flows through many of these presentations, is the idea of building and establishing dialogue with the communities in which the schools are located, where the teachers are going to work. And that the most successful programs and the most successful teachers are almost what you would say embedded in the communities where they're going to have an opportunity to teach. So they talk about recruitment, and recruitment in terms of diversity, as well as recruiting a range of teachers, but we need a more diverse recruitment process, more experiences in the field work, professional coursework, student teaching opportunities, and then ongoing professional development. That's it.
Does anyone have any questions for the group?
Oh, come on, Pete, you got to say something.
I couldn't see what Pete was showing.
Well, your presentation was near and dear to my heart, because in some of our research, we were looking into America's best urban school districts, and many of the points that you touched on is actually what is needed. As you were giving your presentation, what occurred to me is this: a lot of the new teacher programs and the new teachers coming in, I think they're more open to and more in tune with equity and access. Sadly, the tough part is we have a lot of teachers that have been teaching for a long time, and they haven't had that change in perspective, that change in their lens. And so I'm reminded of the young teacher that came to our school district. Kids loved her, but because of the current public school rules that says last in, first out, so that teacher you just described getting all that great training, adios, and what do? We're back to the old lens.
Yeah, no, that definitely did come up in some of that idea. And then the idea that we had an educational system with No Child Left Behind that was very, very rigid in many ways. Whether it meant well or not, in lots of ways, the rigidity of that program stifled a lot of our energy and creativity. And it came up in the literature that some of the most you see some of the most rigid and prescriptive programs being implemented in the schools where the students have the most need. So we're not giving them the most enriching experience, and we're giving them this prescriptive program that's developed by Pearson, where every teacher needs to be on page 5, on Monday, and then you need to be on page 10 by, so yeah, but we're, within the context of teacher education programs, as far as we can see in California, we're not turning out those kinds of teachers. We got some systematic changes that we need to have in place to continue to develop that.
I think I don't have a question, but I have a comment. I really appreciate the way you posed this work for us tonight, and how your group defined neoliberalism and what you're looking at, because I think that as all of us move into leadership positions, and some of you are already in leadership positions, this is the juxtaposition that we have to balance, because on one side sometimes it feels good to be able to check a box and say you've got everyone in line, but from what we've learned from Theory U, we know that just is surface level, and that's what ends up destroying systems rather than helping systems grow and develop. So there's this very careful balance between control and growth, organization and implementation for success, and growth and development that leads to the future success, not an immediate success necessarily. So thank you for framing it so well. I appreciate it. Let's give them a hand. Okay, we are moving on to Michelle's group. Michelle, is your group ready?
Yes, we are.
All right.
Sorry, I had to stop sharing. I'll put it back, but if I didn't unmute myself first, I was going to be in big trouble. Okay. Okay, we're good. Do you guys still want to introduce yourselves? I'm Larissa Calloway Cole, and I guess Ken's not here with us anymore. Go ahead.
I'm Dick Liptak, still.
This is Michelle Hasenongst.
And we would like to share our research with you on reflections, women presidents in higher education. So first, we'd like to start with a little bit of data for you. So first, we know that 27% of higher education presidents were women in 2011, and this is from a data collection this year that was presented this year, making, if you can do your simple math, 73% of the presidents men. Further, 82.8% of women presidents have their PhD or EDD, while only 77.2% of men do. And we also know that women in leadership roles are paid less than men, and they're also less likely to be tenured. Bearing all of this in mind, we chose to use a social constructivist model, and Vic will tell you a little bit more about that later. And considering the experiences and stories of participants, we made a big commitment to be open to collecting stories and not setting up our interviews from a deficit model. We really just sought understanding from all of our participants. And you can go ahead and read these research questions here, but what I really want to point out to you is that in designing our research questions, we really thought about collecting the stories about how women got on their pathway toward presidency, so their past, their experiences as president, so their current, and the stories about their legacy, so what they held for the future. And now I'm going to turn it over to Vic to talk about our methodology.
Thank you. we adopted a social constructivism approach as we began to understand that we shared a philosophical position about this investigation. And I will tell you more about that in a moment. Our research method was qualitative. We designed a semi-structured interview that addressed the 3 research questions. And we developed more specific questions or touch points within each area of inquiry. Because we recognized the value of personal reflection and reflective inquiry, we framed the research questions in those terms and included them in the informed consent form. And this was important because each participant was then clued into the overall structure of the upcoming interview, and she could begin the act of reflecting prior to the interview. Each participant was interviewed by one researcher, in person, over the phone, or by video conferencing. The researcher took notes and, when allowed by the participant, recorded the interview in audio or audio-visual. Interviews were scheduled for 30 minutes, though a participant could engage for as long as she wanted. And the final interviews ranged, in fact, from 25 to 75 minutes in length. We each then transcribed our interview notes, and drawing from our lit review and our discussions, we began to identify, in the interviews that we each did, the emerging themes. We shared our first interpreted passes and discovered a very strong set of 8 emerging themes, which we will talk about in our findings. Next slide, please.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. So, social constructivism. I need to be on the next slide too. Oh, there we go. Okay. We used Creswell's 2009 edition of Research Design, Qualitative, Quantitative, and Mixed Methods approaches. In doing the lit review, we repeatedly encountered research that was mixed methods or straight qualitative. And what emerged was a sense of generating an understanding, letting it surface through the stories of individuals, rather than supporting or refuting an existing theory of leadership. So this constructivist approach was even more open-ended than, say, action or participatory research, where through investigation and inquiry, the researcher addresses a social justice issue. We didn't even have that in mind. We were completely open. We carefully constructed our research questions to avoid presuppositions about gender expectations, biases, and challenges. And you will see in the findings how many presidents ended up touching on these, in fact, in their reflections over the course of the interviews. Next slide, please. For our participant sample, we had very few delimitations because we had very few participants, or vice versa. We focused on current or former presidents who were female, who were in United States institutions, and they had to be second level or better connections to us, which meant we either needed to know them or we needed to know someone who could introduce us to them. And that limited our sample. We had asked the participants during informed consent process to choose the level of identification they felt comfortable with. And because some asked for their identities to be confidential, we decided to code them all for presentation and possible publication. So the generally identifying information is of the 7 participants, 3 former presidents and 4 current presidents. 2 served at private 4-year institutions, 1 at a public 4-year institution, the other 4 served at community colleges. Their starting age when they began their presidency ranged, what did it range from? 40, what does it say there? Can't even see it, 43 and 60, sorry. And 4 of our participants took the traditional path in their career trajectory, which is through tenured faculty positions to increasing responsibility in academic administrative roles through the provost position to the presidency. The other 3 took somewhat non-traditional paths, but they all were in administration in higher ed. They did not come through the faculty, and they did not all go through the provost position. And Michelle will now present our findings.
Thanks, Vic. As Vic mentioned, there were 8 main recurring themes that came up during these 7 interviews that included first, age, mentorship, leadership style, personal and work-life balance, political challenges, gender expectations, and a positive future outlook. And so the first theme, we'll start with the firsts, was the experience of 3 participants being the first in a presidential position. So 2 participants were the first female presidents at their institutions, and 1 was the first Latina president in the state of California, which we thought was pretty awesome. 1 was the first and founding provost of their institution, so a position of executive leadership. And President 4 was the first female president in her institution's 106-year history. So being a first woman president is consistent with the research that says that the number of women serving in the presidency is disproportionate to the number of qualified women in the position. The second theme that arose was age. For those who reached executive leadership early on, there was an acute awareness about their age. 1 participant reflected that she had always been young in positions. And she said, people don't initially realize that leadership comes in that package. She also added in the idea of that package that being a feminine executive leader, wearing heels, wearing dresses, etc., was also part of that package that does not traditionally apply to women in her definition. Another theme was mentorship. From others to others, the theme of mentorship was evident in all participants' experiences. Some mentors served as encouragement for participants to pursue higher positions of leadership, and some referred participants to programs. So they were the mentor in that aspect. So they referred folks to programs or institutes designed specifically to prepare future educational leaders. President 6 shared specifically that every major move had been influenced by a mentor, and that just kind of shows the power of mentorship in all of their experiences. Another theme was leadership style. Each participant had a very clear way of leading. They all identified very specific practices when asked or when talking about their leadership. And those demonstrated their leadership style or philosophy or vision of leadership. 1, for example, volunteer taught a class to test out a new scheduling modality. And the idea was if she was going to ask faculty to change a system or to change the way that they did something, that she was going to do it herself. And so she believed that that was, her way of demonstrating her leadership style. Another makes a point to walk the entire campus, to talk to every single person on campus, regardless of whether they were faculty or staff, students, folks working in facilities. So that was her way of demonstrating how she felt about her leadership. So the fact that they all kind of honed in on very specific actions that demonstrated their leadership, that was something that was interesting that came up in all of their interviews and reflections. Another theme, personal and work-life balance. Still back on the other page.
Sorry.
It's okay. Participants had a variety of home life situations ranging from marriage, divorce, widowship, having adult and small children, or even no children at all, and employment, sometimes outside of the educational institution and even outside the office of president, having a job outside or concurrently while they were in the presidency. One thing that was universal, there was no right time for them to be an executive leader. But this is where we found that mentors played a really big role in their leadership trajectory. Mentors served the purpose of holding up the mirror, as one president had shared, helping to push participants in the study forward in their leadership trajectory. So there was no easy home life situation in any of the stories that we heard, yet they all made it to the highest end of their profession. So that really also demonstrates the power of mentorship. In regards to political challenges, many of the participants reflected on the politics of an institution or even in the community, getting in the way of their ability to make progress. And they reflected on these experiences surprisingly objectively. So it wasn't so much that they experienced challenges. What was interesting was how they reacted or how they dealt with and how they communicated about those challenges. They had a very keen sense of what went wrong, what was in the way of their ability to make progress. But there was kind of a theme of 2 responses. One was either to chalk it up, to push themselves further and push through a challenge. And then the other was to simply move on. And that seemed to be a very okay thing to do. Move on to the next institution, to the next position, and not really feeling any regret about that. That timing was and was not a factor in some of those cases, that they just simply looked for another opportunity where the fit was better. Reflections on gender were across the board. Like we mentioned, we didn't want to go into this process assuming there was gender discrimination. And some participants treaded lightly on the topic, and then others outright identified the complex challenges of gender and even ethnicity and race. There were thoughts on how gender was an asset, and specifically, as the participants defined it, women's intuition and relationship building. They described those as strong feminine leadership qualities, but that was also paired with reflections and feelings of having to work harder and having more qualifications than their male counterparts. And then the final theme that emerged in the end was a positive future outlook. All of the participants that we interviewed had a very positive view of the future for their legacy and for the future of higher education. They reflected on the importance of mentoring others, kind of the paying it forward model, working to open up the leadership pipeline to other underrepresented groups outside of gender or irregardless of gender. Several spoke about inclusion as being important and pivotal for higher education reform. And specifically mentioning, and quite a few did this, mentioning the changing demographics of our students and needing to stay focused on keeping students at the center of everything that we do. Which brings us to our conclusions. So essentially all of the participants felt that serving in the office of the presidency was about something much larger than themselves. It was about something bigger. It was representative of their trajectory, where they came from, the people who have mentored them, their given and their chosen families. But most importantly, what came up was the commitment to students. That was very universal. They prepared. Whether it was through mentorship, institutes, academies, their moves were calculated and well thought out. They sought advice from others and wisdom from others. They also adapted to conditions foreign of change and engaged the community in challenging mental models that limited their growth and learning. They didn't balk at the sight of challenges. This was universal. They leaned in and they often engaged their campus in driving those solutions. And they didn't do it by themselves. And that was also one of the emerging trends was they did it in community with others, with their teams. And ultimately, with varying experiences, gender expectations and challenges, gender still remains part of the leadership landscape until at least there is a critical mass of women presidents, until that's achieved. And we really found all of these women to be transformational leaders. They recognize their current reality, then they move their organizations toward the best future they can envision emerging. I mean, very much true in practice of Theory U. And they not only did this on an institutional level, but also on a personal level. And I think that was really revealed through our interviews. And for recommendations for further research, Larissa is going to share a little bit about data.
Sure. So while we did find studies, and we limited our lit review to the last 10 years, and that there's been lots of study before that on women in the presidency and in leadership, we really believe that there needs to be more increased regular data collection. And not just that this data needs to be collected, but it needs to be disseminated. And we're hopeful that this will help develop awareness of bias, which prevents women from reaching critical mass. And I think that's it, Vic.
Okay. And so again, based on a social constructivist philosophy of generating knowledge, we also recommend gathering even more presidential reflections toward construction of a social theory of higher ed leadership. Since we tried to enter this inquiry without presuppositions about identity expectations from the president's position or from external perspectives, we would recommend widening the participant pool, women, men, and other identities, all toward the construction of a social theory of leadership for higher education.
And another implication for future research is to further conduct studies based on participatory and action research to promote transformational leadership change in higher education, to do exactly this type of study. Sharma says in Theory U that to look inward and to be able to examine oneself is essential to leadership development and organization change. And the fact that we conducted this study provided the time and the space for these leaders to actually do that. And so we thought that, to contribute to further transformational change, that just this practice in itself is definitely a recommendation for the future, to gather more stories and experiences and to give that time and the space to these leaders to reflect and practice presencing. And that has the potential to further the work of social justice and equity in educational leadership. And that is our presentation. And we thank you for your attention and we welcome your questions.
I actually have a question. This topic is really interesting for me because one of my career aspirations is to become a president.
Woo!
Or the other thing I'm looking at and doing informational interviews is chief of staffs, because they also too have quite change influence. So one of the things I've faced already is this deciphering between PhD and EDD. And so there's already this opinion that's made that you can only be a president. So it's an opinion already made just generally. And then to tap on the female component, having a female president, then there's a second component. So there's this theory that you can only be a president if you have a PhD. And I vowed to tear that down. But in the process of doing that, how many of your participants had PhDs versus EDDs?
That's a great question, and I'm going to field this. Bear in mind, Nicole, that many people say PhD and they mean a doctorate. So but you're absolutely right that there is, because I've seen it, a predisposition that gives the PhDs a little bit of an upper hand, or they like to think that. I know of the 3 women that I interviewed, all 3 had PhDs. And I have served under male presidents who have EDDs. So it is, I'll tell you, I think if you go to if you were to serve as a president at a tier 1 research institute, I think there would be an expectation for it. There's likely to be a greater expectation for a PhD. But,
So does that mean I'm getting my PhD next?
If I may add to that, just one thing that I think was interesting is while we talked about and defined what the traditional leadership pathway is to the presidency, while some fit that mold, some didn't. But one thing that was universal for all of our participants was that even if they didn't go through that full time, that traditional trajectory, they all had faculty experience. So whether that was teaching part-time or they at some point had a full-time faculty, they were a full-time faculty at some point, they all dabbled, I would say. That was a universal quality in all of them, even the ones that had EDDs and even the ones that, were, in completely administrative positions or even in community work and organizing. That was another story, but they all taught at least part-time. So,
I would also like to point out, if this is helpful too, Nicole, that one of our participants did not have a doctoral degree, and she was the president of a community college. And her story was very interesting about how she went back and she started and she didn't finish. And that had a lot to do with the theme that Michelle talked about in work-life balance. And that was kind of inspirational to hear her story too. So.
Yeah, and I get a lot of, "You're young, slow down." I'm like, there's no slowing down.
And that was, there's no right time. You do it, you're on your trajectory, you go, you do it, and that's it.
Just one question. So what would you say was the biggest hurdle for them?
I'm going to jump in and say very few of them talked about hurdles. At least the three women that I spoke with they did not frame their experience in terms of hurdles. They framed it in terms of achievements, right? So they weren't talking about obstacles. They were talking about what they had done, what they had accomplished. And I think that's interesting.
So why don't we have more?
Because of bias in hiring.
And that would be an implication for further research. We sought out the stories and experiences, not to look at why aren't there any more women presidents, but to hear the stories of the ones that are. What are they doing? What do they feel about, how do they feel about what they're doing, and what are their hopes for the future? And I think we all walked away having very inspirational conversations and hearing some pretty amazing stories of lots of different pathways and lots of different experiences.
I'd like to send a round of applause to your group. Let's give them all a hand. Very nicely done. I have to take the moment to leap in here, and my colleagues, you can leap in with me, but I want all of you to know that we've built Codel to be an extremely rigorous program. Modeled it after Fresno State, which is known in CPED, which is the Carnegie Project for the Education Doctorate. Fresno State seen as one of the exemplary programs with a very high quality doctorate. And I will tell you, it's not always where you get it from or if it's an EDD or a PhD, but what you choose to do with it. And all of us are mentors for you even after you're done with the doctoral program. We're here to help you further yourselves and go where you want to go. I don't know, Gary,
exactly.
You want to jump in there and say something?
I would echo all that you've said, and right now, and Nancy, correct me, or Ken, or Chuck, correct me if I'm wrong. I was going to add.
What
Ken
meeting are you in today?
Kim could actually, because he's been at the Chancellor's office, could probably be a bit more accurate with this. But I think we're seeing a very significant shift. I think at this point, I'm going to guess, but I think at least half of the CSU presidents are now
11 of 23.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So there's a big change occurring. And as far as the program and the quality, and yes, there's always been this PhD versus EDD, thing out there that, people will say that, one might give you more of an edge than another. But, it's the context of what you're wanting to do with it and being at the right place at the right time. Once you all have it in your hands, there are going to be doors opening up, and there'll be doors opening up before you're even completed in this program. Nancy and I can attest to that based on what we've seen with Fresno State folks and where I've seen folks that I'm familiar with getting that opportunity to move up into a different position simply because they have it, and then gaining those experiences that are important. As Michelle was saying, the teaching part of it, where you have opportunities to do some teaching, that certainly is helpful, and publications and that type of thing. But, not everyone follows that particular path in that particular way. So it's going to vary, depending on what your interest is and what area, your willingness to, in terms of how flexible you are about where you want to live and where you want to be. These opportunities, if you want to stay within a particular region, it's going to limit your opportunities a bit. But if you're willing to seize on an opportunity where you might have to live somewhere else you hadn't anticipated living, or be in a program that maybe is a starting point, knowing that later on you would like to move to a tier 1 institution or something like that, those types of things are going to be what will guide you as you make your journey to where you're all going to be. We'd like to someday be able to acknowledge all of you out of cohort 1, how many presidents we have out of cohort 1 and superintendents and all that kind of thing. It'd be great to be able to brag about you all. as you get into those opportunities. And, you know, the Fresno program certainly has been able to do that with a lot of the individuals that are in their programs.
Can I jump in just briefly? 2 summers ago, I had the opportunity to attend a management development program at Harvard. And one of that was kind of putting my tippy toes in the water of if I was going to go back to school and start this whole process. And that was a big question that I took to that training, was this notion of EDD versus PhD. And what I found there, so here we had 13 participants from I think 15 different countries, and there was a 50-50 shot. 50, you know, of the people who had the doctorate, half had EDDs, half had PhDs. They said that those walls and barriers are actually starting to come down, and that wasn't something that was looked at as much as it used to. You know, just like online education, right? Online education used to be so taboo, and it's obviously people are changing their views on that. So anyways, that's just my 2 cents.
That's good.
And before I go to the next group, I think from all of us, Chuck and Gary and I, we have a little alphabet lesson for you. ABD is BAD, and you shall finish this program.
Yes.
Got it? All of you. Got it? You're too far in now. Okay, Pete and Steve, are you there? Are you ready to go?
We are here.
Hey, all right, take on over.
I feel like we're talk show hosts because we're the only ones sitting next to each other. So
it's the evening edition with Pete and Steve.
This is it. The Pete and Steve show.
We're live.
We're live. So my name is Pete Flores. I am Director of Student Services at Santa Maria Joint.
Steve Valina, LCFF Task Force Coordinator for Santa Maria Joint.
Okay, I'm going to try to get this here going. Share my screen. Is that it?
Yeah.
Can you all see it?
Yeah, slideshow.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So our case study deals with barriers for Latinas and Latinos in middle schools and alternatives to discipline and student support.
So this is just an overview of what we went through. You know, some of the things that you're going to be seeing here. Just take a brief look at that. We're going to move on to the next slide.
So when we look at discipline, I think it's really important to understand the impact of school discipline. Recently, we came across this article from where the veteran dean of discipline at Skinner Middle School admitted, saying, I was suspending upwards of 300 kids a year, and I'll tell you, I'll admit it, that's just what we did in schools. We suspended kids. Looking back, it was a big cop-out. Basically, it just gave kids permission not to be in school. And, you know, as we were looking at what is the basis of discipline in schools, I was shocked to find out that corporal punishment in California was not ruled illegal until
1986.
1986. So if you think about how discipline was handled, that ought to give you a sense of what we're up against.
40 years.
So also look at this picture. If you look at this picture, what do you see? And reflect on that, because I think this picture really, for me, speaks to something that we all know about, and that's called the school decline, if you look closely. So why is our case study important? Well, we're going to show you a quick...
we're going to show you a quick video from the College Board. It's about 3 minutes long.
3 minutes long. Bear with us. I think you'll find it very interesting. Can you all see it?
So part of our discipline data, what we looked at was from the civil rights data collection. It's done every year. I don't know if some of you are familiar with that. I know I do it for our district, but it's relative to race, ethnicity, gender, English learners, students with disabilities. So it gives a whole perspective of data, and I'll give you a glimpse of that in a second. Go ahead and click. So if you look at this data here, you know, Hispanics and Blacks consist about 63% of the expulsions that occurred throughout the United States. Even though when you have, you know, even though that the white population is 51%, you're still exceeding the number of percentage rates. Go ahead and go to the next.
So before we go to this, I'd like to kind of touch on some of the information that it really wraps up. And what it talks about relative to rates of suspension and expulsion is that Black students represent 16%, but 32 to 42% of those suspended or expelled. So to Steve's point, you look at this, and it was really alarming to me how the data stacks up, which again speaks to the importance of how we conduct discipline in our schools.
So again, here's a graph that shows out of school suspension by race, and ethnicity, and gender. And you know, for African Americans, it's exceeding in every aspect of that, both for boys and girls. But along with that, you know, you look at the Hispanic Latino race. You know, it's also up there. Although you know, you see white is a second least amount for both boys and girls.
What I found really alarming relative to this also was Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander, how that's really high. And so that was something that also piqued my interest as far as further study.
So part of our study, included 3 counties. So we did Santa Barbara County, San Luis Obispo County, and Monterey County. And what's unique about our case study is we were able to interview 5 to 6 principals that we had part of our study. We actually went out to their sites, met with them, talked to them, got to observe some of the practices that were also in place. That we'll talk about.
But something that I really liked was not only were we able to interview the principals, but we were actually able to spend time on their campuses and see their students and really get a real firsthand experience as to just the school climate.
So part of our data that we collected, we actually had over 2,200 students that were part of our data. About 1,800 that were Latino, about 385 that were white. And some of the things that we've noticed is that there was a disparity in the suspensions that occurred. And part of the interview process, the qualitative part was, as we mentioned in one of our interviews, we were interviewing one of the principals, and they said, how do you view your discipline and your alternatives to discipline? And right off the bat, the principal came off and said, well, I view all my students the same. And for us, we didn't look at each other, but it was sort of offensive in the way that they said that, because, you're not viewing your students of color. You're not seeing them for who they are and their culture.
So to kind of tag along with that reminds me of when people would say, I don't see race, or I treat everybody the same. And particularly for students of color, I can tell you that they don't feel that they're not treated, that they're treated the same. And so that was really interesting. And the other thing that was interesting was visiting with 3 of the principals that really seemed to have a handle on their discipline approach. Were very, what I would term as culturally competent, culturally proficient, and understood the role that culture played. So here are some of our research questions were, what is the difference in suspensions and expulsions between white and Latino students? What is the difference in GPA? Which we noticed there's a slight difference, but some of the schools actually were very close. And then the survey questions, these were not all inclusive, but these were the primary questions that we really gleaned a lot of great information from. So one thing that in doing our lit review and going through a lot of the research and a lot of takeaways from the interviews and really from our own experience has been that you have to accept the reality of gaps. And I think that we run a dangerous we run a dangerous course that if we don't accept that these gaps exist to begin with, then I think we're going to get stuck. And I really like this quote by Peter Senge, where it says, as the world changes, the gap widens between our mental models and reality, leading to increasingly counterproductive actions. And I think that's where we're stuck.
So here's the paradigm shift that we come to as a conclusion and recommendations that we've seen through this. It's a natural occurring theme that again, like with the principal, I don't view color. I see them all as one kid. And then, also been seen with our students that a lot of them feel that they have to have a punitive matter in order to take control of the school. In one of the schools, they even had to have the sheriffs come in last year, where the school was totally chaos. We're talking about 7th and 8th grade.
7th and 8th, yeah.
Where they're only like 12, 13, and 14 years old. The complete school was out of hand, and the sheriffs come in.
And it was amazing to us because they had a rule of 4. So you had yard personnel that were out on the school campus saying that you could not hang out with more than 4 people at the same time, nor could you move in groups larger than 4. And I started asking myself, why is it that the schools that seem to struggle the most, that have the harshest discipline, don't do as well as, schools that are successful and they have less restrictions? So we found that to be really interesting. And some of the things our other presentations spoke to: implicit bias, equity, looking at our kids and our families from an asset perspective versus a deficit. And of course, we've all heard about restorative approaches, and then moving away from zero tolerance to progressive.
So part of this, we got to see the rule of 4 actually taking place at some of the school sites where their assistant principals, their deans, or actually, they would pick up 4 fingers, and the kids would know. It was like the reaction of the kids would be, it was sad. It was sad.
It was sad, and I told Steve, I asked him this question as we were observing this. I asked him, I said, do you think that this policy would fly at a more affluent school? And of course, the answer was no, because I don't think our affluent parents would have allowed that. So let's get down to the nitty gritty. Everybody talks about social justice, but I want to remind everybody, social justice means taking action. And in order to really take action, I think we have to look at educational reform, which is why we're taking this class. So now there's some key concepts that we want to share with you. You want to go on this one?
From Theory U, from Stromer, it's all about, having that mindset, open mind, the open heart, and the open will.
And open will is where we don't get to. Sometimes we hit the open mind, the open heart, but then the open will, it's lacking. Peter Senge, the one I like is we need to break free as prisoners of the system or prisoners of our own thinking. And that has a lot to do with the way we view discipline. And as administrators, what I tell people is, if you have to be so restrictive, then you need to change your mindset.
So part of that is, going back to Stromer, is that, the prison that you self-initiate yourself in, and that's where you collect your thoughts. And then going to Senge, that's where he said, you can't do this by yourself. There's no one smart person in the group. It takes that collectiveness of everybody working together to go from that technical perspective to that adaptive perspective.
In other words, we need to evolve into a learning organization. And then finally, adaptive leadership. That's where we need to understand the difference between adaptive challenges and technical fixes. What I like about the quote I like the most about adaptive challenges, it says, can only be addressed through changes in people's priorities, beliefs, habits, and loyalties. So I think it all reflects to an inside-out approach.
So your reflections and thoughts.
I know we went a little fast, but we want to try to stay on track with time.
I have a comment and a question. Thank you for doing that. I just wanted to say that I really found your research interesting. From personal experience, my son, who is 9 years old, attended an elementary school that was classified as a Title I school, and he would share stories and experiences of how he felt he was in jail. That's what he described his experiences as. And he was engaged, but he wasn't engaged at the level that I'm seeing now. We moved, and he is now at a school that is not a Title I school. And he is allowed to play any sport that he wants to. And the other school, they were not allowed to play football, for example. They were not allowed to wear hats. So he can wear his favorite baseball hat that he likes to wear. And I think that's important because, the research that we're seeing just in higher ed with males and being disproportionately impacted, when you bring up the notion of females and males, the number of males being disciplined are by greater amounts versus the females. And so I just have seen a transformation in my son with his academics, in math and in English. He's reading more, and he's a lot more engaged academically. And I just think it's disappointing that from the deficit model, it's just really challenging. And we're expecting our students to be able to then transition into college when our K through 12 system oftentimes has not provided them with that opportunity.
Thank you, Noemi.
I just wanted to comment and thank you guys. Okay, so I just got this new textbook and I pulled it out while you were talking because I was so excited. So I'm teaching it for my class and it's called Courageous Leadership in Early Childhood Education. But I just wanted to read this little chunk because it's like exactly what you're talking about. But it's talking about monocultural curricular models. And so there's a lot before this, but it says, these narrowly conceived models perpetuate educational privilege for students from dominant groups while continuing to underserve many students of color, emergent bilinguals, students from low or no income households and communities, and LGBTQIA students and families. And I think that's so true, right? Like that these models that they're setting up, they just work to serve people who already have privilege. And so your work is exciting to me. So, and it's nice to like be able to grab my book and connect it.
Larissa, that your comments would connect right back to the to Kathy and Ryan's presentation, because many people feel the neoliberalism ideals are pushing back for white privilege.
That's what I was just going to say, is that showed up in the literature very strongly, that those systems that they want to put into place definitely are set up for to re-empower white privilege, the moving away from diversity and multicultural education, and using systems like standardized tests and things like that tend to serve certain groups that well and not serve other groups very well. So.
And the other thing too that Noemi just talked about with her son about feeling like he's in jail. I mean, I think that the work that you guys did, Pete and Steve, about this, like future research too, could talk about, like, include school to prison pipeline, because that's huge and directly affects that.
Well, actually, Pete has another name for that.
Yeah, because one thing that I really believe in is that our language also has to change in the way we address these things. So it used to be the school to prison pipeline. Now I call it the barriers to the school to college and career pipeline, because that's what we want. We want that to be the focus. So we want to eliminate those barriers. We don't want to make it about prison anymore. It's like to us, it's kind of flipping it on its head, to where we start thinking about things in the context, especially with culture, in the context of asset approaches versus deficit approaches. And so that's why I no longer use the term at-risk student. I use the term underserved student, for example. And so it's kind of like the other paradigm shift that I had. We always used to say all students can learn. Well, I like to think of it as all teachers can teach, because now that puts the responsibility on the teacher, not the student, because all students can't learn if they got a bad teacher. But if they got a great teacher, guess what? All students can learn.
Right.
I want to thank both of you. There's something that I don't know how many of the class know, but Pete and Steve talked with Dr. Magdaleno back in October at some point and mentioned that they were really wanting to look at a project based on a perspective that they had great interest in, great heart, an open will to complete.
Open will,
and they designed this by themselves. And I appreciate you coming forward and being vocal about what you need. And I encourage all of you to do that. I don't know if my colleagues will agree with that, because I'm not teaching you anymore, but they are. But I think that's what we need in all of you. Step up and tell us what it is that you need in your classes. So let's give them a hand, Steve and Pete. Yay!
Thank you.
So you can't hang up yet. Don't get off, because I just want a chance to thank all of you for tonight. I want to thank Gary and Chuck for staying on with us. It was nice having an audience. I know late in the semester it was hard to get other people to come on. But most of all, I want to tell all of you thank you. It's been a great 7 weeks. I brag about you to all of my colleagues. It's been an honor to be your instructor, and I've learned a lot from watching all of you, listening to all of you, learning from all of you. And thank you especially for tonight. You did an outstanding job. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
So for our final reflection, how much, excuse me, sorry. The mid-semester, or whatever you want to call it, reflection that we had to do before, how much of that do you want in our final reflection? And if that is a part of it, which I would imagine it is, when are we going to get our results as to what grade we got or what type of feedback we received on that, so that that will help guide our final?
I thought I'd put that in there already. I will double check tonight. That would be my fault because I have it on a paper, but that doesn't mean that I went in and I put it in. So I will put it in tonight.
Okay, because I just checked it just to make sure before.
Yes.
And my guess still wasn't in there.
Yes. Yes. Question? Another question?
I have the same question as
Yes.
Allison. Just if we could get some feedback on the journal entries so we know we're.
Yeah, it's completely my fault. I apologize. I've been grading 3 different classes all at the same time, and it gets a little mushy, like what have I entered and not entered. So I will put it in there, and you'll have it tonight. Okay, you'll have it tonight. And you can turn it in. You know, class officially ends on the 24th, on Saturday. I just pushed the deadline to Monday because I couldn't see any of you if you were running behind. I didn't want you writing a paper on Christmas Eve. So you can turn it in anytime, and I will have the feedback up tonight for you then. So.
And do we turn, do we email, do we put that, do we put it in the discussion board, or we send it to you by email?
I would rather you email it to me since we're at the end. Just email me your final reflection paper.
Okay.
Okay. There's a place for you to upload your case study paper for your group, but you can email your final reflection paper. And great, I'm going to turn around grades really fast. So
you don't want our reflection in the uploaded part in Blackboard?
Actually, I would honestly rather if you just email it to me.
Okay.
We only need to upload multiple.
Do you want our presentations?
No.
And then for our final paper, do you need all of us in the group, or just one of us?
One person. One person to upload, and I don't need the presentations because I saw them tonight, and I'm not going to correct what you did. You did wonderful work. Thank you. You can breathe. You're almost done.
One more class, check.
One more class, check, done. Yeah, one more class, check, done. Okay, thank you all, and have a great, great holiday with whatever you're doing or whatever you happen to be celebrating. I want you to enjoy yourselves.
You too. Happy
holidays.
holidays.
Take care.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.